Welcome everyone to the second session of the Food Systems e-course. We're happy to see that we have so many people in this room, and I get several messages in private that everyone likes the song. So I'm happy that it's a song that's liked. It's a good start and a good vibe, good energy to start this live session. This week we have two amazing guest speakers. We have Just Dengerink, a colleague, but also the lead of Module 2. And then we have Bram Peters from Oxford and from Foresight for Food. I will give them each some time before their presentation to give a short introduction. But I would like to start with Just, who will be leading us into food system analysis and why it's useful to use systems thinking in that. Just, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Wonderful. Great to see so many of you here. It's always a pleasure to be part of this course, and yeah, it's really an honor to be coordinating this module on food system analysis. And together with Bram, my colleague from Oxford, we will take you on a journey through the world of food system analysis, the tools that we have available for it, and how we can use it to make impact in our work. And a lot of my work concentrates on analyzing changes in food systems and supporting food system transformation processes in a multi-stakeholder context, often using a lot of scenario and foresight tools. But today we will focus in this presentation on food system analysis. How do we analyze the food system, and how can we use food system analysis to guide our work? The presentation that I will give is split in 4 parts. So first we'll dive a bit more in, if we talk about food systems, how do we define it? What are the main components? Then we dive a bit more into the role of systems thinking in food system analysis. Then I'll give you a bit of an overview of some tools that we're using to analyze food systems. And then we close off with showing a bit the value of using a food systems approach in analyzing the work that we're doing in food systems, and what kind of benefits does it give for your work and practice. To start with the first component, what do we understand under a food system? What is the role of complexity in a food system, in food system analysis, and what are the main components? So if we talk about a food system, and we talk about all elements and activities from production to consumption of food, as well as the markets and all the institutions that govern the system. So it's not only the value chain, but a much broader set of interacting elements that constitute the food system. And I think very important for when we analyze food system is that we look at different types of outcomes of the system. So not only food security, but also nutrition, and also environmental impacts, and also social outcomes. So we look at the broad set of things that are the result of everything that we do in the agri-food system. And if we talk about food system actors, we talk about all segments in society that depend on the food system in any way. So those can be farmers, those can be retailers, consumers, but also, for example, input providers or researchers in agriculture. And I think one of the main purposes of doing a food system analysis is to navigate the enormous complexity of our food system. And so if we think about our food system, we can think of a system that is connecting millions of producers with billions of consumers through complicated value chains. We can think about the flow of different materials and food products and how they are processed into the food that ends up on our plate. And we can think about all the transport and the logistics that happens with it. But there's an enormous complexity to make sense of, and I think food system analysis really helps us to navigate that complexity. Now, if we talk about what are the elements that constitute a food system, I think many of you will be working in some way or another related to the value chain and what happens there, from production through transport and trade, processing and transformation of food, retail and provisioning, to food consumption. But actually, the food system, of course, is much bigger than that. It's also about the enabling environment in which these activities take place, the food environment the assignment was about, the business services that supporting the value chain activities, and some of the consumer characteristics that play a role in why we choose for a certain type of food and maybe neglect another type of food. And then if we take it a bit bigger, what happens in our food system? So the activities that we do as a farmer or a retailer or a processor are very much driven by all kind of different factors. They can be markets in terms of the market price, they can be policies, that can be technological advancements, but also social factors. How do we look at food? What do we value? What are our traditions around food? And then we have a range of environmental drivers that also really impact what we do. So we think, of course, about climate change. How is it affecting the way we produce food? But we can also think about water that we need for maybe processing our foods. Or we can think about the use of fossil fuels or minerals in order to improve our food production. So there's a lot of drivers that actually drive what's happening in the food system. And a key element also of what we consider as the food system is its outcomes. So it's really about not only the food security outcomes that are often at the center, but also what are the socioeconomic outcomes? What is the wage for a farmer or a farm worker? But also what are the outcomes, more the environmental outcomes of our food system? What is the impact of agricultural production or processing on the environment, on biodiversity, on climate change? So if we put all of this together, that's what we will look at in a food system analysis. So not only the value chain, but much more its broader context, its drivers, and its key outcomes. And if we do food system analysis, one thing that we often take as a main ingredient is systems thinking. And when we think about food and agriculture as a system, it's good to think about the type of problems that we're seeing. And these problems you can categorize in different categories. You can say they're simple problems where there's quite some certainty about how you can resolve the problem. There's quite some agreement on how you do that. But you can get increasingly difficult problems if there's less agreement on how to solve them and less certainty that you will actually manage to do so. And if you have far from any agreement and you have large amounts of uncertainty, we start to talk about what we call wicked problems. And that's the problems we see very often arising in food systems. These very complex problems with a lot of factors driving them, where it's not so easy just to do one thing and then the problem goes away. So where we have simple problems that are as fixing a bike, the complex problems are really as maintaining and taking care of our garden, where there's so many interactions between the different plants and animals in that garden that just doing one thing and then knowing for sure what the outcome will be is not always the case. So you have to trial and error, try different things to think, okay, what is the effect of one thing on another, on another, on another? And that is, I think, what we see in complex systems, and the food system is a complex system. What makes the difference between a difficult problem and, let's say, this wicked problem? If you have a difficult problem, you still have some clear priorities. It can be treated as a standalone matter. There's a limited number of people involved. There's knowledge about what needs to be done, and there's a limited time scale. But with a wicked problem, the priorities are, the problem cannot really be disentangled from its context. There's a lot of actors involved, and there's quite an uncertain time scale in which this problem plays out. And also it keeps evolving, so the problem changes in nature over time. And that's, I think, something that we see happening a lot in food systems. So what does it then mean to take a systems approach? That means that in order to address these complex problems, you look at a holistic description of the components. So you say, okay, instead of looking at individual elements of, in this case, the elephant, it's a wall, it's a tree, it's a snake. If you're blindfolded, you maybe only see one component. But with the food system, the challenge is how can we see all of the components together so that we can make sense of it? And I think that sort of seeing the different components and their relation, that I think is what food system analysis can bring to the table. Another element that often plays a big role in analyzing systems is looking at how different actors in the system relate and also engaging stakeholders from across the system to understand the system better. So that's where the multi-stakeholder collaboration comes in. And the third element that's important for systems thinking or systems approach is it includes moment by moment decisions of players among multiple available options. So the strategies that we have in food systems are really dependent on the previous steps and on the decisions by other stakeholders. So that means something for the type of problems we have. We have emergent problems that are really influenced by a lot of other actions in the system. So how can we then go about to understand these different levels of systems? And one way to do that is to use this iceberg model that maybe some of you already saw in the assignments. And the idea of this model is to say, okay, on the surface, if you have an iceberg flowing in the ocean, you see the events that are happening on a day-to-day basis. And if you want to act on these events or symptoms of the problem, you can find quick fixes, end-of-pipe solutions that can solve some of the problem, but not its entirety. And that's because there's a lot of things happening under the surface. So we have all kind of patterns that are visible over time. If you look at how, for example, food productivity or the biodiversity is developing over time, and you look at the longer time scale, these patterns are really important to get an understanding of where the system is moving. So we're not looking at one event or one single point in time, but we're looking at patterns over time. And one part of food system analysis is often to identify these big trends over time in all kind of indicators, economic, social, and environmental. And that helps us to also anticipate the future and think about, okay, what might happen in the future if things develop in the same way. Then there's a deeper level where we look at, okay, but how is the system composed? What is the structure of the system? So that's more about, okay, what are the relations between the different elements of the system and how can we maybe redesign this structure in order to get better outcomes. So that's even one level lower. And then the lowest level, which is maybe one of the most important levels, is the level of mental models. So how does the way we think about the system, how does the way we think about food and how we produce that, and for what purpose we do what we do in the system, how does that actually influence the reality? So changing the way we think about food, for example, changing from a productivity mindset to much more a nutrition mindset, or from a mindset which is more focused on export, to also looking at, okay, but what are the externalities when we think about the environmental impacts of the whole value chain. Those are ways of changing our thinking about what is the purpose of our food system that can help us to also reshape the way we organize it. So systems thinking helps us to dig a bit deeper in what is affecting the system as it is, and what does that mean for the day-to-day reality of our food security situation, of our environmental situation, of our economic situation in the food system. And one way to think about these levels of systems is to think about what are entry points for changing a system? How can we go about it? And I think often when we think about changing the food system, we think about we need to change policies, or we need to change farmer practices, or we need to change the financial incentives. We need certain subsidies, or we need maybe more investments. And that's definitely an important part of it. It's structural change. But there's also levels of change that are more relational, which are more about how do we change the dynamics in the system between different stakeholders? How do we change the relationships and connections between the different players in the system? And that's a level that also has a lot of influence on how a system works and how what outcomes it produces. And then there's one deeper level, and that's the level of mental models. So it's really the level of how do we think about the food system? And that level can really also result in transformative change. If we think differently about what the food system is for, then the way we organize that system will change dramatically. Another way to think about how to change a system is leverage points. So it's places in a system that we can intervene. And you can see some of these elements of this triangle back here. And we can see that the more we go to the right side, the more leverage we have to actually change the system. So these mental models, even though they're very hard to change, they might have the biggest impact on changing the system. Well, maybe some policies and practices, if we only change that, really shifting the system in a completely different direction is difficult. If we don't also change the relationships and the connections, if we don't also change something about the power dynamics or the way we think about what the system is for, what are the outcomes that we find most important? Is it biodiversity, or is it nutrition or food security? What is the balance between those? So this thinking about leverage points helps us to also see, okay, where in the system can we intervene, and also think, okay, of the options that we have to change the system, which ones might have a bit more leverage than others to really make a change. Okay, then we dive into food system analysis and what kind of tools do we actually have available to make sense of the food system as a complex system. You will see, if you haven't already engaged with that material on Curator, is that we have put there an assignment around the toolbox that we have developed around food system analysis together with Wageningen University and KIT, Royal Tropical Institute in the Netherlands. And there we really look at food system analysis as a 5-step process. That we go from certain policy objectives, first analyze what are the key actors that play a role in our system, what are their power dynamics, then look at what are the system characteristics, so try to understand what are the drivers, what are the activities, what are the outcomes, but how do they relate as well, and then look more into system behavior. So what is the behavior of the different actors in the system? How does one thing lead to another? Where do we see these leverage points I was just talking about? And if we have these 3 elements of food system analysis, that can lead us to some really practical recommendations about where in the system do we see most opportunity for change based on what we have learned about the dynamics in the system. Now, as I said, that there's these 3 elements of actors, characteristics, and behavior. And below you see a figure of the type of tools that we have under the chapter, which is more about system actors. So for each of these 3 components, we have, I think, about 8 or 9 different tools that you can look at. with an indication of how much time does it take. Do we need a group of stakeholders to be included in that? Um, Other kind of requirements we need. What is nice about it is if you click on one of these tools, you will also be directed to the website that gives a longer description about how to do such analysis. What I think is very important, and which is also part of this toolbox, is that there's three quality principles that are important when doing a food system analysis. One is really use that systems thinking. So not only thinking in parts, but thinking in the whole, not in disconnection, but in the interconnection. Not thinking in silos, but more thinking in emergence. How do different elements emerge over time in relation to each other? And also thinking in these different levels of system change from more the level of events, patterns, structures, mental models. And the second quality principle is stakeholder involvement. So our experience with doing food system analysis is that the more you engage stakeholders in the process of analysis, the richer your insights become. You have more different perspectives, and co-creating an understanding of the food system is often a good step to, together with these stakeholders, also think about what does that then mean concretely for solutions, entry points, interventions that can help to change the system in the right direction. And I think it's important to have stakeholders from different levels, different sectors, different social markers, and also use a variety of methods to engage stakeholders. But of course, these multi-stakeholder processes require experienced facilitation. So if you have experience as a facilitator yourself, wonderful. But if you don't have so much experience in that, either acquire that knowledge or find other people that can help facilitate these processes who are have this background in stakeholder facilitation. And the third principle is equity and inclusion. So I think there the question is really how do you make sure that a food system analysis process is carried out in a way that people from across the food system with different decision-making power are involved. That you not only look at the formal sector, but also at the informal sector that plays a very important role in the food system. That you also look at youth, that you look at women farmers as an important group. And that you really make sure that there is good involvement from a diversity of groups across the system, those who are more powerful, but also those who are more marginal in the system. Then the question, of course, is, okay, nice, we have a food system analysis, but how do we translate that into action? One way to do that is to really look at what are these leverage points. So what are the points in the system where we see opportunities to have a small problem-solving force, so with limited efforts, have a large effect on system behavior. And then it helps to think about what type of interventions might be more happening in a structure or mental model level to complement some of the actions that are maybe around policy or change, or maybe or are around changes that are maybe more related to practices or financial flows. So how can you find a package of interesting leverage points that's operating at different levels of the system? I think it's also about finding innovations that are already happening that you can further accelerate to move the system in the right direction. And the third point is using not only the leverage points and these sort of mechanisms of influence to really select, also in the context of maybe some broader policy objectives, these intervention areas. So there's a few components that have to come together in order to decide, okay, what is the action or the intervention I can take based on the information that we have gathered in the systems analysis. Knowing we're at the end of the time, I have a few more slides and then I think I'll wrap up. Some final thoughts. I think I'll skip this one and go directly to this one. What is the added value of a food system approach and doing food system analysis? Will food system analysis result in more impact? It depends on how you do it. I mean, the main aim from a food system analysis is to broaden your thinking using a systems lens, get new perspectives on problems and solutions. And if you do it well, it can really help you to understand, one, the bigger picture, and by that make informed priority setting. So really make priorities in where you want to act because you have that bigger picture. Understand the external processes that can accelerate or oppose what you want to achieve in the system, and also help you to engage stakeholders in a decision-making process. Then, if you think about what makes an intervention a good intervention from a food systems perspective, I think there's some general guidance there. So make sure that you not only look at food security, but also on healthier diets as an outcome. That you think about what are some of the key drivers of the systems change and how can you make changes there. That you link both technological interventions with things around behavioral change. That you involve a wide range of different agents to make the intervention possible. And that you're not only looking at one value chain, but also look at how can we see the interactions between different value chains or sectors. Combining maybe more local and global solutions, and identifying solutions that are maybe in other areas than where the problem itself occurs. Sometimes you need to change something in a completely different part of the system because through these different changes in the system, it's connected to a solution somewhere else. And I think that's where the food systems analysis comes in, is that we really go from an approach of fixing problems that are occurring in a certain moment in time to really finding system solutions that are long-term change processes involving multi stakeholders with more impact and leverage on the system by really looking at, okay, where in the system can you intervene to have the biggest impact in the end. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you a lot for your attention. Looking forward to your questions. And I'll hand over to Bram Peters.